The story of the child sex trafficking ring that has come to be known by the term Pizzagate goes much deeper than just Comet Ping Pong. In this episode, I'm going to present to you evidence that the Clinton crime family has been engaging in human trafficking at least as far back as 1985. What you are about to learn may shock you. I'm Jake Morphonios, and this is the End Times News Report. In previous videos, I have established from the flight logs belonging to convicted child sex offender Jeffrey Epstein that Bill and Hillary Clinton took several trips on Epstein's private jet, which he calls the Lolita Express, out to Epstein's personal island in the Caribbean. The island, which is known for throwing pedophilic orgies for the rich and powerful, is colloquially known to journalists as either Orgy Island or Sex Slave Island. Bill Clinton himself shows up on the logs of this aircraft at least 26 times. In less than 2 years, just in the time from 2001 to 2003, Hillary herself shows up at least half a dozen times in that period as well. Now, this Clinton friend, Jeff Epstein, he is a well-connected billionaire, someone whose friends include heads of state, Hollywood celebrities, even royals and monarchs from around the world. Known to many of these people is the fact that Epstein was running his own child sex trafficking operation out there in the U.S. Virgin Islands on his own privately owned 72-acre island. Epstein ended up spending 13 months in prison for procuring children for these sex parties. It's a sentence that clearly indicates that powerful players had succeeded in getting him a reduction in the sentencing. Clearly, that Bill and Hillary would be so closely associated with such a man is cause enough to question the integrity of the Clintons. But as you're going to find out, there's a whole lot more reason to question their integrity. As soon as Bill Clinton left office in 2001, he immediately was out there traveling to Sex Slave Island to go party with these underage girls. But what some people missed was on the very day that he left office, the day that President George W. Bush was inaugurated, that was January 20th of 2001, we saw that Bill Clinton did something quietly, kind of under the radar so it wouldn't get noticed. In that final hour there, he issued a presidential pardon for his own brother, Roger Clinton Jr. So what was it that Roger had done that required his brother, the President of the United States, to issue such a pardon? Well, Roger Clinton had been caught trafficking cocaine, and associated with that cocaine operation were hedonistic orgies for pedophiles back in Arkansas. The story of Roger Clinton proves that the Clinton family had been trafficking girls as far back as the 1980s. So let me get into this story with you. You may not know this, a little bit of trivia for you, but Bill Clinton was actually born with the name William Jefferson Blythe III. His father was William Jefferson Blythe Jr. He was a traveling salesman. Bill's mother's name was Virginia Dell Cassidy, and his parents, they got married back in 1943. Although Virginia later learned that the man that she had married was actually a bigamist, Bill's father was married to another woman at the time that he married Virginia. That's true. So Bill is born in 1946. Just 3 months before his birth, his father was killed in a car crash. So we've got this little boy, little Bill Blythe. When he's about 4 years old, his mother got remarried, and Bill's new stepfather's name was Roger Clinton Sr. He was a Buick dealer, a car dealer in Arkansas. One person who knew him described him as, quote, a handsome, hell-raising, twice-divorced man from Hot Springs, Arkansas. All right. 1956, Roger Clinton Sr. and Bill's mother, Virginia, they had a child together, and they named him Roger Clinton Jr. So that means that Bill and Roger are actually half-brothers, not full brothers. So Roger Sr., he was not a good father, not a good husband. He was an alcoholic, and he used to beat Bill's mother, which led her in 1962 to divorce him. But strangely enough, just a couple of months later, they got remarried. And it was at that point that Roger Clinton Sr. formally adopted young Bill, which is how William Jefferson Blythe III became William Jefferson Clinton. Growing up, Bill and Roger Jr. had a pretty close relationship, and that was partly because Bill Clinton would have to step in and physically protect young Roger from being hurt by this abusive father. But okay, now that you know what this relationship is between Bill and Roger, let's skip forward a little bit in time. Go to 1972. Bill Clinton ran for the U.S. House of Representatives, and he lost that one. But in 1976, he ran for the state attorney general office in Arkansas, and he won that election. At that time, the governor term, the term for governor in Arkansas, was only 2-year terms. And so after 2 years as state attorney general, Clinton ran for the governorship. That was in 1978, and he won. But he lost his re-election 2 years later in 1980. Now, this is where the story starts to really build, because shortly after that 1980 loss, Bill Clinton cozied up to a man named Dan Lasater. And these two men quickly became very close friends. More than that, they were big-time partying companions. And later on, just a couple years later, Lasater ended up working with Bill on regaining the governorship in 1982. He ran again and won. But in truth, Lasater had been a friend of Bill's brother Roger for a few years before Bill had actually got to know him. Roger was a struggling musician. He was barely making ends meet. So Lasater gave Roger a job on his horse racing farm, which I think was down in Florida. But one day Roger approached Lasater and said, "Hey, look, I'm in trouble. I owe a drug dealer $8,000. And they told me that if I don't come up with the money, then they're going to try and ruin not only me, but they're going to put out information to try and ruin my brother Bill with it." So Lasater was naturally worried that Roger's dilemma could harm Bill Clinton politically. So he paid the debt, the $8,000. But at the same time, this was the point at which Bill Clinton and Dan Lasater started dealing cocaine. But not for money. They were dealing cocaine out to young girls for free. Lasater has gone on record admitting this, that he and Bill would throw wild parties and they would bring in troubled young girls and give them free cocaine. Roger, the brother, he participated as well, although he was also he was selling cocaine on the side for profit. One of the best accounts of this story was written by Ambrose Evans Pritchard in a book. He was the Washington bureau chief of the London Sunday Telegraph. So he wrote a book on the scandal several decades ago and included in it interviews that he did with some of these girls who were abused by the Clintons and Lasater. One girl, 16-year-old Patty Ann Smith, said this, quote, "I was a virgin until 2 months after I met Dan Lasater. He plied me with cocaine and gifts for sexual favors, and I finally gave in and slept with him. I could get an 8-ball from Lasater whenever I wanted it. I carried a vial of it around at school." Clinton and Lasater even had a gynecologist connection, someone who put Patty and some of the other girls on birth control pills. Why? Because they were being passed around as sex toys at these sex parties that the men were throwing. Patty Ann gave this testimony not only to Evans Pritchard, the author, but also to investigators when they tracked her down trying to gain testimony for a court case that they were building. Speaking of the network of girls that was being controlled and prostituted by Lassiter, she said this: "We were like hens in a roost with the rooster. We got along in a bitchy kind of way because we didn't want to be expelled from the roost. I knew a lot more than I should have known. Dan's enforcer told me that if I ever betrayed his personal trust or hurt Lassiter in any way, I would not see daylight to tell about it anymore." Now, Patty Ann had good reason to be afraid. The Clinton gang and their pals, these are not people to be trifled with. Now, I'll give you an example. A call girl named Judy Gibbs. She once appeared in Penthouse magazine. She was running a huge prostitution operation around this time, and among their clients were many of Bill Clinton's friends. According to Judy Gibbs' sister, Sharon, Bill was actually having an affair with Judy. But when Judy agreed to cooperate with the police who were doing an investigation into the coke trafficking in Arkansas, something happened. She was unexpectedly burned to death in a house fire next to one of her other lovers, a 57-year-old real estate developer. I forget his name right now. Well, the local fire chief, whose name was Roy Wayne Mosley, he said he had no explanation at all as to why these two people couldn't manage to just walk out the door or climb out a window or somehow get out of the house. There was no way to explain it, how they ended up dead in this house fire. Now, as was reported by the Daily Mail, in just a 6-week span between June 22nd and August 2nd of that year, there were 5 such unexplained deaths of people who had these unusual connections to the Clintons. And by the way, Judy Gibbs got her start in prostitution as a teenager after being lured into it by her brother-in-law, a really scummy guy named Dale Bliss. He's right now he's serving a life sentence in prison. He's been in prison for over 3 decades for child rape. So it just lots of these child molesters connected to the Clintons. So these girls and the young women, not just then but today as well, these people who are stuck in sex slavery, they don't leave for a number of reasons. There's addiction to drugs, heroin, cocaine. There's the shame of it. They don't want to go back to their families because they're so ashamed of what has happened to them, what they've participated in. There is, in some cases, actual brainwashing. But perhaps the biggest reason of all is that they don't want to be murdered. They see what these evil men do. There is a statement given to police by a teenager whose name was Michelle Cochran, and she testified this. She said of Lassiter, "He used drugs and money eventually to seduce me. As a result of the relationship, I became addicted to cocaine." See, that's what they do. They get these girls addicted. If you've seen the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, it's kind of the same idea. They snatch these girls, take them off to Europe in that movie, inject them with heroin against their will, get them addicted, and then the girls are stuck. Well, despite Lassiter being the primary operator of this child sex trafficking scheme, Bill and Roger Clinton both were playing a role in it as well. Patty Ann said that, the young teenage girl, she said that both Clinton brothers were part of the drug and sex scene there in Little Rock. She said, "I met Bill Clinton several times. He'd know my name and I thought he was a wonderful person. But I can tell you that he was never acting like a governor when I saw him." And she later said that she personally witnessed Lassiter and Bill Clinton snorting lines of coke together in Lassiter's kitchen. Over the next few years, this relationship between Dan Lassiter and Bill Clinton grew even stronger. Lassiter was throwing fundraising parties for Clinton at his own offices. He provided his personal airplane to Bill and Hillary to use, whether it was for political campaigning or just going around for personal use. Sounds a lot like Jeffrey Epstein, doesn't it? But by the time that Bill was back in the governor's mansion, Lassiter had gotten himself involved in laundering money for the cocaine trade. and he was doing it through his own bond firm that he had set up. Now, Bill Clinton was helping Lassiter with this money laundering operation. What he did was he made Lassiter's firm an official underwriter for state-issued bonds, meaning that Lassiter was able to use a state agency to launder large amounts of drug money. This was all done with Bill Clinton's full knowledge. There was a lot more than that related to the drug running going on that Bill knew about. There was an Arkansas state trooper, a man named Barry Spivey. He was assigned to the governor's security unit from 82 to 84. He was kind of like a personal bodyguard to Bill Clinton. And one time he confronted Governor Clinton after personally witnessing these airplanes full of cocaine being flown into the state, coming into a little airport called Mena, or in Mena. But Clinton did nothing. The topic of the Clinton connection to this CIA drug running through Mena, Arkansas, the airport there, that's a massive scandal unto itself. But the drug operation started to unravel when Lassiter was sued in 1985 for illegally using money for unauthorized bond trades. And then he was publicly accused of drug trafficking. So during the savings and loan bailout scandal, some of you may be old enough to remember this. It was in the mid-'80s. The Federal Deposit and Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, they decided to sue Lassiter because they wanted to recoup some of this taxpayer bailout money that was being used to prop up these failing banks. Now that's where Hillary Clinton comes into the picture. The FDIC, for some reason that I still haven't really figured out, they decided to hire a couple of people from the Rose Law Firm in Arkansas to try and prosecute Dan Lassiter. The names of these two attorneys they hired? Hillary Rodham Clinton and Vince Foster. Despite Hillary having this very close personal association with Lassiter, she neither reported that relationship to the FDIC, nor did she at any point recuse herself from the case, which you're required to do by ethical standards. Well, Hillary quickly, she got through this fast before anyone knew what was going on. She quickly negotiated a secret, very favorable out-of-court settlement with Lassiter that resulted in the government recouping nowhere near what they were originally after. And it was only after this deal was done, the ink was dry on it, that the FDIC learned of Hillary's relationship, this personal relationship that she had with Lassiter, the guy that she was supposed to be prosecuting. And after they learned that, the FDIC issued a very critical rebuke of Hillary Clinton in a public report on the issue. And I'll mention this as a side note. It's highly likely that Vince Foster and Hillary Clinton were lovers. There's also a very strong case that Vince Foster's apparent suicide after the Clintons got into the White House was actually a Clinton hit job. But that also is a topic for another video. But I'll just say one last thing about Foster. We have testimony from a woman, a lady named Mrs. Parks. She was the wife of a security and intelligence gathering operative. The man's name was Jerry Parks. Well, she said that her husband used to deliver large sums of money from the Mena airport to Vince Foster at a Kmart parking lot. She said that how she discovered it was that she had gone out to her car one day and opened the trunk, and it was filled with cash. Bags and bags of cash. So much cash that to just shut the trunk, she had to sit on it to get it to latch. So she confronted her husband about this and asked him straight up, "Are you a drug dealer? Where is this money coming from?" Mr. Parks said no, he wasn't a drug dealer, but he was being paid about $1,000 in cash by Vince Foster for each of these transportation deliveries from the airport to this Kmart parking lot. Her husband told her that he didn't know what the large bags of money were for. He didn't want to know. He just wanted to take his money. But in the book I mentioned earlier by Evans Pritchard, uh, he says that Foster was using Mr. Parks to do a lot of this work later on behalf of Hillary Clinton. And one of the jobs that Hillary had passed on to Parks through Foster was the task of doing some local intel there on her husband to see how much dirt existed that could potentially be used against him if he ran for the presidency. But anyway, let's jump back to Lassiter. After the trouble with the FDIC that Hillary and Vince Foster had helped Lassiter to navigate, he wasn't out of the clear. The problems did not disappear, though Bill Clinton was able to use his political power to deflect litigation against himself. He couldn't stop it from going up and sucking in Dan Lassiter and Roger Clinton. And those two men ended up in court. And what the court transcripts and records prove is that Lassiter and Clinton, they weren't actually selling the cocaine to these girls. They were giving it away to them free. Lots and lots of it. I remember reading about ashtrays full of cocaine that would just be set around on these tables. There was a man named Larry Nichols. He was the former director at the Arkansas Development Finance Authority. And he said that they weren't selling the cocaine. They were giving it away. Let's see here. Oh, here's where the quote came from. It was actually from Nichols. He said, ashtray upon ashtray full at the parties were being given away, and they would give it to young girls. That's sick. I mean, they were giving a highly addictive drug to young girls. And when Nichols was asked about one girl in particular, he told the court this. He said, the last I heard of her was when we had her subpoenaed back to the federal grand jury. At the time, she was a hooker in Lake Tahoe. So these girls did not have good lives after they met up with the Clintons. Nichols explained that it wasn't just one young girl who told this story about Lassiter and Clinton. It was several of these girls. He said that many underage girls said that they had been seduced into cocaine addiction by Roger Clinton and Dan Lassiter, and that in order to get their fixes, because the men weren't selling the coke to her, they would give it to them, but they had to come get it at the sex parties. The men were throwing sex parties where they would have their associates come in, their powerful friends come in. They would make the cocaine available to attract the girls who were addicts, and while there, the girls would be passed around among these friends. The man who headed the case against Roger Clinton and Lassiter, the man who provided a wealth of court testimony, was Arkansas police investigator Doc DeLauder. He testified that the girls were not legal age teens. We're not talking about 19-year-old girls. These were young girls. He said one particular child comes to mind. She was a 14-year-old cheerleader. She was a virgin, and ultimately they ended up sending her to a physician of Lassiter's. The physician put her on birth control pills. They used cocaine in order to, ultimately, she lost her virginity and she got addicted to cocaine. DeLauder also testified in court, quote, during the last investigation, we had numerous witnesses for the federal grand jury, had extensive testimony of people that were connected with Lassiter, with drug use and everything else. His cocaine use had become used as a tool for sexual favors and also for business deals to influence people. And that's when Lassiter had become quite flamboyant with his cocaine use and ultimately led to his arrest and conviction. All right. At the trial, Lassiter admitted that he and Clinton both gave free cocaine to young girls at their parties. In the end, Roger Clinton pled guilty to the cocaine charge. There really wasn't anything he could do to defend himself against it, because the court had video footage that was used against him. And in this video footage, again, a matter of court record, among other things, it shows him with cocaine in his possession, and he said that I got to get some for my brother. He's got a nose like a vacuum cleaner. What? You mean the man who told the American people that he never inhaled when he put a joint up to his lips at a party actually had a nose for cocaine like a vacuum cleaner? Well, I think it's absolutely intolerable that our justice system has allowed itself to be manipulated for the protection of Bill Clinton. No one should be above the law, and it's a travesty that the Clintons have enjoyed impunity from these investigations over their crimes for so many years. It's one of the reasons that I feel so strongly that President Trump needs to not let Hillary get off, to not pardon her, to not turn and look the other way for her recent crimes. These Clintons have been protected for far too long, and it's high time, no pun intended, for them to be held accountable. Let's go back to Lassiter. On December 12th of 86, I think it was 86, Dan Lassiter entered a plea to the felony charge of knowingly and intentionally conspiring to possess and to distribute cocaine. He was given a 30-month sentence in prison. 30 months is nothing for what he did. 30 months? That's not even 3 years in prison. But do you know how many months he actually spent in prison? Only 6. Why? Because he was pardoned by Bill Clinton and released. And of course, neither Roger nor Lassiter spent any time in jail for their child sex slavery that they were engaging in. Now, just a couple years later, in a separate court proceeding, there was a convicted drug dealer, someone who had been helping to throw these parties, supply drugs at these parties, named Charlene Wilson. She testified in 1990 before a grand jury that she had attended several parties with the Clinton brothers. And in that testimony that she gave, she said that she had witnessed with her own eyes Roger giving cocaine to Bill. She also said that on one occasion that Bill Clinton was so high that he passed out into a garbage can. He fell over into a garbage can. But even worse, Wilson testified that at these parties, there were with the Clinton brothers, there were young teenage girls, and that these girls were being passed around and made to have sex with a lot of the men that were there. Okay, these are pedophiles. People who have sex with children are pedophiles. Now, having heard not just speculation, not just rumors, I'm giving you court testimony that you can research. You can find this stuff online yourself. If you take the time to look for it, it's not hard to find. Doesn't it strike you as very, very wrong that the outgoing president of the United States, Bill Clinton, not only issued a pardon for his brother Roger, but he also had issued a pardon for this horrible guy, Dan Lassiter? Bill Clinton knows that, like himself, both of these men are pedophiles who have engaged with sex with young children. So once again, we have tied the Clintons to a world of child sex slavery. Even if, let's just suppose, even if the Clintons themselves were as pure as the white-driven snow, the fact that an American president pardoned a child-pimping monster like Dan Lassiter, admittedly a close personal friend of the president's, and then went on to pardon his own brother, knowing what this man has done to children, it is absolutely beyond belief. So let's summarize. Bill and Roger, two brothers. One, a political insider. The other, a cash-chasing networker. Both with ravenous sexual appetites link up with a well-connected host of political fundraisers and wild parties for the rich and powerful. And together, they work to put the Clinton family into the highest echelons of government. And undergirding their activities are the ever-present rumors of child sex slavery. Does anything about this story sound vaguely familiar to you? The two brothers, one a political insider, the other a cash-chasing networker, who link up with a well-connected host of political fundraisers and wild parties for the rich and powerful, all three working together to put the Clinton family into the highest echelons of government, and undergirding their activities an ever-present rumor of pedophilia. Does the story of the Clinton connection to child sex trafficking in Arkansas prove that Pizzagate is real? You can be the judge of that yourself. But when you add together one piece of evidence after another that I have reported on previously, a mosaic begins to form. The colors of the Clinton palette are painting an image for all to see. Can you see it? If not, keep watching, because my reports on this subject have only just begun. For the End Times News Report, I'm Jake Morphonios.
Dan Lassiter, who was best friend of Bill Clinton, who went to jail with Roger Clinton for cocaine. And by the way, let me explain something. He didn't sell cocaine. No, they were giving it away anyway. Huge piles of cocaine in his office. Ashtray upon ashtray full at the parties, and they would give it to young girls.